Welcome to a sun-soaked Oak Park at the occasion of the trials event, crop trials event here. It's taken place over 2 days, and this is the first of 2 days. And we're using this opportunity to bring you a live broadcast of some of the things that have happened here today and to be engaged in discussion and conversation with you, the viewers, on some of those subjects. But before we do that, or before I give you any more information, I just want to give you a quick flavour through video of some of the things and the sites that happened here earlier today. If I can begin by just presenting the order of events for the evening, and basically we will be giving you a feel and a flavour directly from the field via recordings that we made earlier and in discussion directly with the researchers involved, and bringing you both the opinions and some of the things that can be seen from those trials. We will do that in sets of 2 videos, and after each video, after each pair of videos, we will then have a discussion. And I'm joined here just at the moment by Richie Hackett, and Richie will be my guest for the first one. But before we go to those videos, I just want to bring you just some welcome messages from our host, John Spink of Teagasc, and also from Justin McCarthy, editor of the Farmers Journal, who are helping to bring this broadcast to you tonight. So over to the welcome notes.
Good evening. I'd like to welcome you to this virtual element of the Oak Park Open Day. Obviously this time last year we were hoping to hold a much bigger event, but as events has transpired we're very limited on numbers. But it's great that we can continue the collaboration with the Irish Farmers Journal and bring this virtual event this evening to you. For those of you who can't attend in person, and I hope you enjoy the evening and find it very informative.
We're delighted in the Irish Farmers Journal to be able to support Teagasc in bringing this information to a wider audience. Having been round the stands, it's a great testimony to the organisation, to all the researchers, advisors and specialists, the quality of the information being given here to help farmers farm more efficiently, both from a technical perspective and indeed an environmental perspective. We really hope you enjoy this live broadcast.
This is the first outdoor event really that most farmers in the country have been able to engage in since COVID restrictions came in almost 18 months ago. And as a consequence, it's the first time that people have a chance to meet friends, neighbours, acquaintances, the researchers, their advisors, etc. So we just want to bring you a very quick flavour of what some of those people were saying when they came here this morning.
I'm Nicky Kane. I'm from South Wexford near Osler Harbour. Crops are looking well. Winter wheat, winter barley, all looking well. The later sown spring barley didn't like the wet May, but anything that was sowed before the 1st of April is relatively good looking anyway.
Julian Ashmore from Ballycarney, County Wexford. Yes, the crops are looking better than last year. Spring crops in particular, there's no regrowth this year compared to last year. And yeah, be fairly optimistic for the harvest.
My name is Jim Whelan. I'm from Ballingale, Ferns, County Wexford. The winter wheat at the moment is looking pretty okay, pretty good in general. The spring barley is field dependent. If it's on good even soil and dry soil, it's a good crop. If it's on soils that had been messed about or reclaimed years ago, those patches are showing up as thinner crops.
Nigel Gillis is my name, from Grange Con, County Wicklow. Crops overall this year are looking good actually, except for winter barley, which completely failed. Sown in very bad conditions, too late, too wet. But apart from that, spring barley and beans are the other crops I have, both looking pretty good actually.
My name is Liam O'Byrne. I'm part of a tillage Johnstown Castle group with Teagasc here, and I live down near Rosslare Harbour. So crops are looking reasonably good, the winter wheat especially, and the winter barley is looking reasonably good as well. But spring corn took a hit this year with the cold and the wet. Probably kind of land that wouldn't have been suitable for corn anyway, you know.
I think the harvest will kick off around the 15th, 20th of July. It'll be a bit later than last year. We haven't had the heat that we've had over the last couple of years, and we would have always started around the 10th of July, but I think it'll be about 10 days later this year.
Say the winter barley will be probably about the 20th of July, and spring barley maybe 12th to 15th of August.
I'd be fairly confident it'll be around, it'll be no later than a normal year. You know, that crops have this ability to suddenly start ripening, and if you get sunshine in the latter half of July, they'll come in very quick.
We're normally a bit later than most places, so spring barley could be well into August. Now, look, weather, who knows? You know, that's what I'd be thinking anyway.
I think the winter barley will probably come in about 3 weeks' time, and the winter wheat will be middle of August.
I think grain prices will be above average. They were looking very good for a while. They've had to fallen back a little bit now, but I think by the time we come to get paid, that there'll be demand for Irish grain.
Price this year, yes, certainly looks better than last year, and hopefully it'll stay there.
Our prices, please God, will be better than last year, and sure, as I always said, yesterday is history and tomorrow is a mystery in that sense.
Crystal ball stuff. I have forward sold a lot of mine. I do a bit every year, so I've sort of 2/3 of it sold, which may or may not have been a good decision. Time will tell.
Now, if I should rate myself, I have a share of that, and thank God the price is good with that. And we're looking probably €500 a tonne for that. Hopefully it'll stay at that. And I'd like to see the barley maybe 190 and wheat at 200, but that's all to play for.
Well, it was great to hear those largely optimistic comments with crops looking good from those farmers in Wexford, and hopefully prices will hold. Now we move into the business end of the programme, where we begin to address the actual research that was on show here today, or at least some of it. The first two sessions that we're going to go to are dealing with barley yellow dwarf virus, a lot of research, an important disease, an important pressure even for farmers to be dealing with on their farm. And also the second video of this pair will deal with rye and liquid nitrogen, both a crop and a technique of nitrogen application that has become increasingly questionable is the wrong word, but of greater interest to people as we're going forward. And I'm joined here by Richie Hackett of Oak Park, and I'll chat with Richie after we run the videos. So first over to the two videos, which were hosted by my colleagues Siobhan Walsh and Stephen Robb earlier when they spoke to the researchers.
So Louise, thanks for joining us. We're in a field of winter barley, and a lot of farmers will be familiar with barley yellow dwarf virus. It affects winter barley and spring barley and cereals in general. Tell us a little bit about the importance of that virus to farmers and to crops and yields.
Yeah, so BYDV, barley yellow dwarf virus, is a very important virus for cereals. It affects the grain yield and the grain quality. It can cause yield losses of up to 80% with a severe infection. Controlling is quite challenging, as you know, due to loss of insecticides, like we lost the seed treatments there in the last 2 years, due to aphid resistance emergence. So we have partial resistance to pyrethroids in grain aphids. Climate change is a challenge as well. You know, milder winters will mean that aphids can survive for longer, move around in the crop for longer, spreading virus. And also there's a lack of thresholds. So we don't know how many aphids in a crop or how many aphids flying around is a good enough reason to spray. So together it's quite challenging.
Yeah, and so this year it was quite a low pressure year. Temperatures were cold in the winter time. It was very wet and cold at sowing time. So those are things that we need to learn about. So there's a tower here, and that's going to tell us a little bit about aphid flight and how the virus is passed.
Yeah, so because there's no thresholds in place for aphids, and when we see an aphid in a crop, we consider that a good enough reason to spray because we don't know if they're carrying virus or resistance. So to try and improve on that and to maybe look at developing thresholds, we've established a suction tower network like the one here. So we've 3 of them, one in Carlow, Cork and Oak Park. They're 12.2 metre towers, and basically how they work is any insects flying overhead is sucked down into the pipe into collection jars. That's done daily, and then we identify those insects and we test them for virus. So coupled with that, Teagasc has invested in a digital droplet PCR platform, which basically just means it's a platform for testing the aphids for virus. So it can, as well as saying if it has virus or not, it can also do the viral load, which tells you the exact amount of virus in an aphid. So together, when you take the tower and you take the platform, we can understand better aphid migration. So when aphids are flying and what weather conditions you need, it tells us when the aphids are carrying virus, so you know what times of the year virus appears and when your crops are most at risk. And also it allows us to test the aphids for resistance, so we know what proportion of migratory aphids are carrying resistance.
That's great, Louise. So we'll ask Max a little bit about his results. So Max, Louise explained that you're sampling on a daily basis from the tower. Can you tell us a bit about what you're finding?
Yes, exactly. So we kind of have these bottles where we're collecting the aphids and store them. We bring them to the lab, we sort them, identify them, and then we can test them either for the knockdown resistance, whether they are pyrethroid resistant or not, or we can test them for the virus.
Okay, so pyrethroids, a lot of aphids in Ireland are resistant to pyrethroids. So what did you find?
So we found that 22% of the aphids from the suction towers, from the migrating aphids from the suction tower, are resistant. And we found that the aphids start to fly towards the end of March and until mid-August. So right now we need to find the decision what the impact of those migrating aphids towards BYDV spread is. And therefore we are trying to sample them for the next couple of years. And also we have established the suction tower network all over Ireland with 3 different towers. And all of that data from the next couple of years will give us a better resolution of insecticide resistant aphids and BYDV spread over Ireland.
That's really good. So the data, Max, will help farmers to make decisions in the future on when to spray and what time to spray at. Thanks very much.
Yes, hopefully.
So, Richie, we're here in Oak Park on a trial site where you have hybrid rye sown. There's been a huge amount of interest in hybrid rye over the past couple of years. The area has tripled this year in particular, but there's a lot we don't know about this crop. So explain to us what you're doing here and what you're trying to figure out.
Well, Stephen, that's right. It's a relatively new crop in Ireland, so we're doing all the basic agronomy work on it. So things like sowing date, seeding rate, what's the correct amount of nitrogen for the crop. And I suppose also, as we can see, it's quite a tall crop. We're looking at what's the correct growth regulator program for the crop in terms of optimizing the output of the crop for growers and providing advice to growers.
I suppose whenever you talk to growers about rye, there's a couple of things that they're concerned about. One is lodging and 2 is ergot. What are you finding here in terms of both of those issues?
Well, in terms of ergot, we have yet to see ergot in any of our trials over the last 2 years, and it doesn't seem to be a huge problem with the modern hybrid varieties. In terms of lodging, again, it doesn't seem to be as big a problem as you would expect given the height of the crop. The crop is actually a very, very strong stem, and anytime we do see lodging, it's due to root roll rather than actual buckling of the stem. So if ground is rolled after sowing and a reasonable growth regulator program applied, and most importantly, you don't put too much nitrogen on it, lodging doesn't seem to be as big a problem as you might think given the height of the crop.
Okay, and just briefly in terms of nitrogen, I mean, what are you talking about? for the crop?
Again, it's ongoing work, but we think sort of 15 to 20% less than you would put on an equivalent wheat crop in the same situation. So something like that. So if you're putting on 200 kilos of nitrogen on your wheat, you might put on 160 kilos on your rye in the same situation.
Okay. In terms of harvest, Richie, I mean, do you see a future in this crop? Are we expecting high grain yields, or indeed is it suited as a feedstock for maybe anaerobic digestion plants?
Well, we've in the 2 years, 2 harvests that we've done, we've found very good yields, so equivalent to or better than winter wheat in the same situation. So it seems to have very good yield potential under our conditions, with somewhat lower inputs than winter wheat. In terms of a feedstock for anaerobic digestion, yes, it's a potential for that. It's not something we're looking directly at, but obviously if it's got a high grain yield, then you would expect to be good in anaerobic digestion as well.
Okay, so just across from us, you also have trials ongoing looking into liquid nitrogen. So we're just going to pop over now and have a look at them. So Richie, liquid nitrogen, a lot of growers interested in it, a lot of growers trying it for the first time this year. But you have liquid nitrogen trials ongoing here in Oak Park. What are you finding?
I suppose, Stephen, the main thing we're looking at is we're comparing the liquid N to CAN, which is sort of the standard nitrogen on most arable crops. And what we're finding is that the liquid N can be every bit as good as CAN in the majority of situations, but there will be occasional situations where some of the nitrogen is lost from the liquid N, and in those situations the liquid N isn't quite as good as the CAN. So you can suffer a little bit of a yield penalty.
So I suppose would they be the same kind of situation as you'd have issues with urea?
Exactly the same, because there's urea in the liquid N, and that's what the nitrogen that's been lost. So it's exactly the same as with urea.
Okay. Have you done any work here with inhibitors for liquid nitrogen?
Not yet on the liquid nitrogen. We've looked at the inhibitors on the urea, all right, but not on the liquid N. Something we hope to do going forward.
Is scorch any bit of an issue? Have you come across it, or?
No, it can be an issue, particularly if you apply to wet crops that dry out afterwards. But in general, we haven't found it to be a huge issue with our trials.
So then, typically, is there any real advantage you're finding from liquid nitrogen, or?
I suppose the main advantage of liquid N is in terms of evenness of application. So you can go in conditions that mightn't suit a normal fertilizer spread, or windy conditions, for example. Particularly on headlands, you get more even application on headlands. You get a definite cut off of the hedge, so you're not throwing any into the hedge, and you're getting the full rate out to the hedge. And on ins and outs, it's going to be more accurate on ins and outs. So that evenness of spread is the main advantage of liquid N.
So it suits some situations?
Yes, farmers with bigger acreages and wider tram lines, they're the people that will suit most.
Fantastic. Thank you, Richie.
Well, that work that's being done on barley yellow dwarf virus and the interview with Max and Louise was very interesting, and we look forward in time to bearing the fruits of that research and getting better and more targeted advice. Equally, the work that's been done on the rye and the liquid fertilizer, the liquid nitrogen, is interesting. And as I said earlier, I'm joined here by Richie Hogan, Richie Hackett, who's doing it. And Richie, can I ask just why is there a particular interest at this point in time in liquid nitrogen? And what specifically are we talking about when we're talking about liquid nitrogen?
Well, I suppose liquid nitrogen is basically a mixture of urea and ammonium nitrate dissolved into solution. So it's different from some of the other foliar type products that people would be using. And it's mainly a replacement for your CAN, your main split of nitrogen. In terms of why people might be looking at it, well, I suppose one of its main advantages would be in terms of evenness of application, particularly on the headland run and on the ins and outs, where it can be difficult to get the correct rates using a fertilizer spreader when you're using a sprayer, as you do for the liquid nitrogen. It's that bit easier to get more even application in those situations, and particularly for the bigger growers, that can be advantageous.
At this point, I should remind people that we certainly will and can take questions from viewers. So if you have a question, use one of the numerous ways to send it in, and we'll try and deal with it. One of them is webinar@farmersjournal.ie. So if you have questions, just get them in on the different media that are there. They're being flagged on screen. Richie, then, if people are using it for those good reasons, but is it a good fertilizer? Is it as good as or better than the things that it might replace?
Well, the work we've done looking at it compared to can is what we found is that it can be every bit as good as can, but there will be situations. I suppose most growers are familiar with the fact that nitrogen can be lost from urea, a normal granular urea, and the urea component of the liquid N is susceptible to loss as well. And under certain situations, there is the potential to lose some of the nitrogen from the liquid N. And if that occurs, it won't be quite as good as the can. But in the majority of situations, it will be as good as can. We haven't found any situations where it's better than can to date anyway.
And Richie, is the makeup of it, is it roughly 50% urea, 50% ammonium?
Yeah, it's a 50-50 mixture of urea and ammonium nitrate. So 50% of your nitrogen is as urea, 25% is ammonium, and 25% as nitrate.
Okay, and from the work that you've done so far, is it a product that would suit all crops, or would it have a particular niche for some crops?
It can be used on all crops. It doesn't seem to be a problem with using it on crops. It can cause a scorch in very certain situations, and maybe sort of crops that are a bit more sensitive to scorch, maybe not. But we haven't found any problems on any different crops we've tried it on so far.
Okay, so it's a real alternative for people who choose to use it.
If they choose to use it.
And if they have a system set up that can handle it.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll move on to rye then for a second, Richie, because for a lot of people, rye is a relatively new crop. They may or may not have seen it before. So why are you looking at rye? Why is Teagasc looking at rye?
Well, I suppose we did some pilot studies on it a couple of years ago, comparing it to wheat in terms of grain yield, and we found it to be as good as or better than wheat in terms of grain yield. So that certainly made us look at it again. And then it has a number of other advantages in terms of disease resistant. It's got quite good foliar disease resistant. Brown rust and mildew are sort of the two main diseases. Doesn't suffer badly from septoria, so that's a big plus, and it's good resistance to take all. It's very nutrient efficient, good tolerance of drought, so it is a lot of things going for it in terms of crop production.
So it looks like it's a real option for people going forward.
It's potentially a real option, but there is some issues with it as well. The main issue is the market is relatively limited currently. More and more merchants are becoming interested in it, so that may evolve over time. And it's some other issues with it as well. It's quite a tall crop, so you need to be careful in terms of lodging control. And so there are some issues with it, but in general, the story is reasonably positive.
So if we can turn interest into demand, we would have another crop option.
Yeah,
as you see it.
Certainly another crop.
Okay, Richie, thank you very much. It's time to move on, and now I move on to session 2 of the various videos and trial reports that we're doing. And in this instance, we're going to talk about beans, where we talk with a video with Sheila Alves in the field. And the work that they're doing is very interesting, and beans in particular, we're looking at them as being an integral part of the next Common Agricultural Policy, and we're looking at a drive to push area higher and higher and higher. But we must also stand back and say, if we're pushing our acreage of a single crop higher, we're increasing risk. And if we're building a demand for protein, we really have to be able to find more than one crop to supply it safely over time, year in, year out. So we're interested to look at some of the stuff that's going on there. Also in this pair of videos, we're looking at machine hygiene, because one of the points, I think, or the topics that really hit a core with people going through today was the whole issue of grass weeds and grass weed problems and grass weed resistance that's beginning to come around the country. And while we might look at various ways that which those problems can actually enter fresh land, clean land, new farms, certainly one of those ways is that it would be carried in on machinery that's working from farm to farm. And the concept of having to clean that machine as it comes onto your farm or as it's going from an infested field to a clean field is something that has become increasingly conscious, I think, in the minds of many tillage farmers. So with that, we'll drift straight into those 2 videos, and after that, I will be joined by Shea Phelan of Teagasc.
Sheila, thanks for joining us. So protein is a big topic at the moment, and there's lots of really good work going on around Oak Park in relation to protein. So just explain a little bit about what's going on in this trial plot and why you're doing it.
Hi, Steve. So this field is all planted with protein crops. We have faba beans and peas. Faba beans is a crop that already is being cultivated in Ireland, but there are issues, and we are optimizing the agronomic parameters to try to overcome those issues, which are mainly yield instability. So we tried different cultivation systems, and we are testing in an European project around 200 different varieties to see if we get high yielding but also resistant to diseases and abiotic stresses, and in this way stabilize the yield. In regards to peas, we know peas can grow in Ireland, but the standing ability is very poor. So we are trying mixed crop systems with peas and other legumes to see if the crop can stand up to harvest without lodging.
Fantastic. So I'm going to go have a chat with Shay now, and we're going to take a look through some of these plots.
Okay, thank you very much.
So Shay, we're standing here in one of the trials. You're doing some work in relation to bean agronomy, specifically around seed rates and establishment techniques. What are you finding?
Yeah, Stephen, as you say, we're doing kind of looking at the agronomy of bean crops. So what we're looking at is here we're looking at seed rate. So what's the optimum seed rate for spring beans? Okay, so if we know that guys in the UK are generally sowing that bit higher than what we're doing here, so we're trying to find what's the sweet spot in terms of where we need to be at in terms of seed rates. So what we're finding in spring beans that you're probably somewhere around 30 to 35 plants per metre square established is kind of the ideal. You can see yield increases up to higher levels than that, but you know you come under pressure then from diseases like chocolate spot and that. So we need to find out what's more suitable in that situation for an Irish context. In terms of the establishment rates, then we're also looking at plough-based systems versus direct drill systems or min-till systems. So we're looking at plough and a conventional one-pass system versus, say, the likes of a Claydon drill. And even we're looking at a plough and a Claydon drill combination as well to see which are the best. And to be honest, there's really not much difference in any. I suppose probably what's more critical is soil conditions at the time of planting is probably more critical than the actual establishment method.
Okay, good stuff, Shay. Now we're going to take a walk over to some really interesting pea trials. Shay, we're walking through this trial plot here, and it looks like there is a mistake with the drill because there's peas and there's beans growing in the one plot. What's going on here?
Yeah, you're right, Stephen. We have a combi crop here of both peas and beans, which are obviously both proteins. Beans are suitable to certain soil types in Ireland, not suitable to every crop or every soil type. So peas are more suited to lighter soils like what we have around here in Carlow and Athy, whereas beans are more suited to that kind of heavier soil, which is more moisture retentive. So for peas on those soil types, one of the big problems we have is lodging when it comes to harvest. So it makes it very, very difficult to harvest because these will fall flat on the ground. And the other problem we have is pigeon grazing, and pigeons will graze them at that stage as well. So the idea here is that we grow beans as a crop to hold up the pea crop, and that will stop it from lodging come to harvest time. And so far they're looking okay at the moment. They're holding them up, so hopefully they won't go down.
I mean, you can really see it. The peas have literally clinged on to the beans as they've both stretched. I suppose from an agronomy point of view, I mean, what's the challenges of growing two crops in the one field?
From an agronomic point of view, they're pretty similar. Same herbicides, same fungicides. They're sown slightly at different times and are harvested slightly different times, and we can probably get over them. But certainly they get the same diseases like chocolate spot. The same herbicides are used on both crops. So from a farmer's point of view, growing them it's quite similar.
I suppose then from the end product point of view, the harvest, you're obviously harvesting together at the same time. You're going to end up with a mixed product. Are they sold separately and separated, or are they sold as one product? Or
well, last year what we did was we harvested them all together. Now obviously peas normally ripen in August, and they're normally ripen about the middle of August, whereas beans traditionally they're ripe in September. So we harvested them late, so it was kind of beyond, if you like, the time for the peas, but they were still standing, which is fine, because that's one of the big problems you have is when they go down, they're difficult to harvest. And we harvest them probably a little bit earlier for the beans, so they were probably a little bit high in moisture, but we can dry them, so they shouldn't be a problem.
Okay, so it is a mixed product at the end.
Yeah.
Okay, very interesting. Maybe a sign of things to come in the future. Thanks very much, Shay.
No problem, Stephen.
Dermot, grass weeds, an ever-increasing problem on tillage farms in Ireland. Machinery hygiene is one way of decreasing the risk.
Yeah, machinery hygiene is hugely important. We're trying to stop moving seeds from one farm to another, or even within a farm from particular fields to other fields. So the seeds you know about, you've heard in the last case about the grass weeds that are difficult to control, sterile brome, wild oats, but now we're particularly worried about blackgrass, and machine hygiene is absolutely important. So what we're really advocating is that whether it's a farmer with his own machinery or a contractor, whether all the machines that are used around harvest, balers, trailers, drawing straw, combines, all should be cleaned before they leave the field. You go through the process then, you move to the new farm or new field on your own farm. It's as well run the machine again at that point and give it a quick cursory clean, because stuff will dislodge in movement. But then to note exactly where you start in that new field, so that in the next season you can check that area again. So if you have a baler, for instance, that has come from another farm, note where it comes into, what field it comes into in your farm, where it starts, where it drops the first bale, and check all of that area.
Thanks, Dermot. We're going to go to Brendan now, and Brendan is going to show us the ins and outs of cleaning the combine. First of all, he has his safety gear. So Brendan, safety gear here, keep the dust off, the header is off. What's first?
Keys in the pocket first, machine turned off, and then we'll show you a quick run around in the combine here, what's important. So we're using something like this, a brush here, or an ordinary brush, and a leaf blower. And that'll actually get a lot of the material out here. You're poking at all these surface areas in here, getting them all, and blowing them out through the back of the header then. Okay. So we're going around then, possibly opening these guards as well, so they get to clean those back as well. And then on the feeder housing here, so getting your brush here and brushing off all the top of that here, going in around here as well, and cleaning out all underneath the elevator there as well. So then underneath the header, this is important, safety piece, put down your safety piece here as well. So cleaning underneath there, you have your stone trap, and you have your grain pans. We can take the grain pans out in this one, so clean those out if possible, and blow in with the leaf blower as well to blow all that out. And then we'll come around the side of the combine here, and we have the grain unloading auger here, which will be some seeds left down at the bottom of this, so you'll need your step ladder here to get up and take out any surplus seeds or grain that are in that.
And Brendan, all this time, combine is off,
Combine is off, keys in the pocket. This combine here has its own air hose built in, which would be very useful to blow down off all these pulleys here. A lot of nooks and crannies, we can blow them down and clean them down easily. And then come around the back of it here. This one's got an auto setting on a cleaning setting on the sieves here and that, so we can set it to that. But if you haven't got that, you will have to open up all your cleaning sieves and your fan, open them up fully, and then at this stage you'll run the combine then flat out then for maybe 10 or 15, maybe a couple of minutes anyway. That'll get all that stuff, but you're doing this on a disused area, an uncropped area if possible. So then when you've that all, you'll shut down the combine, keys in the pocket again, cleaning down all these loose surfaces here again where material will have landed on it as well.
Onto your chopper.
Back onto the chopper then here. This has got a straw chopper on it, so you'll have to engage and disengage that as well, opening and closing the hood here at the back, because a lot of seeds and debris will get landed in there. Top of the straw walkers as well, so you need to possibly get in on top of the machine to look at the straw walkers and clean them out as well. It's a little bit of work
Might
involved.
have to be done a few times.
Yeah. So then we're coming around here on the side of the combine then. You've got the two grain elevators here, so with the two guard covers taken off those, and we'll again, this is probably pre-running as well. You'll do all this and run the combine then. We have two cross elevators there, cross augers there, opened up as well fully, and you're letting all the grain or any sample, any dirt go out there underneath as well. Cleaning off all the pulleys on this side as well to keep that clean. So there'll be a lot of stuff built up around top of elevators, and then you may need to get into the tank as well. That's a two-person job really, because for safety reasons you'll need to get up there, particularly if you go with barley awns, and that will hold a lot of material in there. So you need to get in at the top of the tank and clean out debris and that. Obviously, machine turned off, keys in pocket.
A really quick run through, Brendan. What are your top tips?
The header, a lot of material on the neck and the header, so blowing that off, open the elevators at the bottom, and open all your sieves and fan and run in a disused area.
That's great. Thanks a million, Brendan.
Right.
Well, they were very interesting and informative interviews, and thanks to the researchers and my colleagues for bringing them together and pulling them together. And I'm joined here now by Shay Phelan, crop specialist with Teagasc. And Shay, I have a question that came in from a viewer, if I can get straight into it. And the question is from Robert and Meath, and it says, should my contractor clean the combine or the baler before it arrives in my field, or is it okay to clean it in the gap or in the laneway?
Ideally, they should really clean it before it ever gets to your farm. So what we would suggest is that before the contractor leaves the field that they've been in, that's the best place to clean that combine, because whatever seeds he may or may not have picked up in that field, you're trying to leave them in that field. You're not bringing them along the road, and even driving along the road will shake the combine up and loosen things up. So you can get spillage on the road. So we're saying really and truly it should be done in the field before he leaves. If failing that, if you can do it on a contract on the yard or something like that, where you can sweep up any material or something like that, or as Brendan said or Dermot said, where you do clean it down, if you have to clean it out in the gap, make a note of it, go back and inspect it later on to see if there's any issues then later on.
I can remember in many years ago, people bringing me to show me these weeds that are now becoming our scourge, growing on the sides of the roads in counties where the weed has now become a serious problem. So it's better if it's not in the parish.
Exactly.
That's really what you're saying. Okay, I have another question in, Shay, and this is more to do with the topic you were dealing with yourself there, the mixed cropping, the combi crop. You showed peas and beans together. This is from Mark in Wicklow. Will they not be very difficult to harvest at the right time?
Yeah, and that's the challenge, Andy. I mean, what we're trying to do here is it's a proof of concept. So we're trying to see if this can be done. We don't have all the answers yet. So what Sheila Alavis and Kevin Murphy were doing in the field there earlier on was trying to look at varieties that may or may not suit the situation. So we're looking at varieties of peas that are slightly later ripening and varieties of beans that are slightly earlier ripening. So in that way, you close that gap in terms of the two crops being ready. That said, some of the trials we did last year, we left the peas in situ even though they were ripe, and let them on to let the beans ripen a little bit. And what we found is they still held okay. Even though some of the pods would have split, they didn't spill out. Unlike if they had been just a conventional crop of peas where they would have collapsed on the ground, and obviously the pigeons would have got in and got them then. So we are trying to look and see, is there a way we can kind of narrow that gap between the ripening of the two crops?
And if in a situation, Shay, where you left them to be harvested very late, was there a significant deterioration of the skin of the peas? You know, would you lose the quality market if you had to wait that long for them?
It's weather dependent, Annie, to be honest. And I mean, last year we were lucky in that we didn't see that. And it's the first year we've really looked at it. But certainly it is an issue there. If you leave a crop, any crop, longer than what it should really be in the field, you're always going to have that potential issue that whereby you can get deterioration of the quality. And again, it comes back down to how much pea you want to harvest or how much bean you want to harvest, and what's the relationship there, and what's the ratio of crop we need to have of each to get the kind of maximum benefit. Because really the concept is to try and broaden the area of protein crops that we can grow in this country, because as we know, beans are probably the predominant crop that we grow in terms of proteins, but they're not suitable to every soil. And certainly soils around Athy, Carlow, very light soils, they tend to burn up when we get dry weather. So peas are probably more suitable to those type of soils. So we're trying to broaden that appeal.
And if we were to double or treble the national area sown to protein crops, we would actually be quite vulnerable if we depended on a single crop alone.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, Shay, we're out of time. Thank you very much for those comments and answers. And now we move on to the third session. The next two videos that we have to bring you are dealing with the cause for having to clean the combine down, the whole issue of grass weeds, the rapid spread, the need for identification, and the need for the management of infested land to try and contain and reduce that population going forward. The second part of the second video in this pair is dealing with wheat diseases and wheat in general. We'll talk a bit about varieties, etc., and the challenges that we have going forward to try and maintain a viable wheat industry in the country. So over to the videos.
VJ, we're here outside the glasshouse in Oak Park. Unusually for Ireland, it's actually too hot to go into the glasshouse, so instead we're going to do it out here. VJ, you have been sampling Italian ryegrass samples from around the country, and you've been testing them for herbicide resistance. Explain to me what we're looking at here. What have you found?
So in front we have the Italian ryegrass population collected from Cork. And initially, we tested them with a number of ACKs herbicide like Axial, Falcon, and Stratus Ultra, and as well as ALS herbicide Pacifica Plus, Broadway Star, and Monolith. This particular population exhibited a wide range of resistance across the main herbicide groups. So to quantify the levels of resistance, we compared the cock population with the susceptible population collected from a commercial breeder and tested with the dose rates ranging from 0.25 to 8 times the recommended field rate of ALS Pacifica and ALS Broadway Star.
So what we're looking at here is Broadway Star. What we're looking at here is Pacifica Plus.
Exactly, yeah. So you can clearly see the susceptible population. By the time you reach the recommended field rate, it gives complete control. Whereas the population that we collected from cock at a recommended field rate, which is 500 grams per hectare, you can see there is not much difference between the untreated and the treated one.
So this is recommended field rates, and there's virtually no control.
And again, this is the recommended field rate of Broadway Star, which is 265 grams per hectare. And you can clearly see there is some reduction in growth compared to the untreated, but in field condition, it is very inadequate.
Okay.
And you can clearly see even after the recommended field rate, the control is very inadequate. And even at 8 times, there are some plants damaged, but not necessarily dead. So this is a very worrying, considering there is no option to control such a multiple herbicide-resistant population.
So we're up as high as 8 times the recommended rate. Still hasn't controlled it.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Also, you're looking at blackgrass here. So we are very quickly. What are you seeing in blackgrass?
Just before we move to blackgrass, we have this Italian ryegrass population tested with glyphosate just to see if there is any alternative option. But you can clearly see that there is the plants are damaged but not dead. This is again very worrying because there is not much herbicide or chemical option left. So let's move into the blackgrass. So this particular population has been collected from Dublin, and when we tested with the label rates of ACKs, Falcon and Status Ultra, as well as ALS Pacifica, this population was completely resistant. So to find an alternative herbicide option, we tested them with glyphosate from 0.25 to 8 times the recommended field rate. You have to be mindful that these plants have been grown in controlled glasshouse condition, and they have been sprayed with sprayed at 2 to 3 leaf stage. So
you're not seeing any level of control, really?
No. Even at the recommended field rate, which is 1.5 liters per hectare, you can see the control is very inadequate, and it seems there is a high level of 1.5 times the recommended field rate, which is 1.5 times the 1.5 liter hectare is required to get some level of control.
Okay, so out and out there's glyphosate resistance blackgrass in Ireland.
We cannot conclude it as a resistant, but maybe a evolving resistance or some degree of tolerance, because there is no glyphosate resistant blackgrass at the moment, even in the UK. So, so if it is if this particular population is from the UK, and if it is widespread, then it's very worrying.
Okay, PJ, look, thanks for explaining that to us.
Thanks a lot.
Michael, we've seen some very alarming results from PJ's herbicide resistance testing. I suppose for all the growers watching tonight who have grass weeds in their crops today, what do they do? What's the practical measures to take?
The very first thing farmers need to do is get into their fields, walk their fields pretty well. And it doesn't matter whether they've used a herbicide or they haven't used a herbicide. They have to get in and walk, because there's always plants that escape. They need to identify what plants are in those fields, and they need to assess how severe it is. Is there big patches? Where are they in the field? At that stage, there can be actions that can be taken. It's really about preventing seed return coming back into that seed bank. So hand roguing might be an option. Burning off may well not be, because seeds have kind of failed really at this stage. The next thing is the post-harvest type scenario. Farmers are going to have to get in and try and get rid of that seed bank, reduce it down. However, you really need to know the weed that you're talking about. Some of the bromes need to be, they need to get into darkness very quickly. Other bromes, they need to be left out in the light for about a month to try and get optimum germination. So at that stage then, you're kind of moving on to looking at the rotation. There's a lot of things farmers can do in terms of knowing the weaknesses of these weeds. So for instance, you need to incorporate winter and spring cereals and winter and spring non-cereals in a rotation to get the best of all the tools that are there.
Okay, all good practical steps. So then let's just move forward to autumn 2021 for next season's crop. If someone is starting to drill next year's cereals, is there anything they can do, or is there any other changes which can be made to
Yeah, Stephen, there's some really nice practical steps that farmers can take. Plant as late as you can. That's generally going to be helpful for certainly bromes, blackgrasses, most of those weeds. However, you do need a very competitive crop afterwards. So there's always a compromise between going too late and not getting a good crop, and late enough that you're not getting much grass weeds. The second step then after that really is look at pre-emerge herbicides. They are going to be more effective than post-emerge herbicides.
Okay, Michael, all very good practical measures. Thanks for joining us.
So, hi Stephen, great to be out here in the wheat plots in Oak Park. There's, unfortunately, I suppose, there's a lot to see in wheat this year. It's a high pressure year. What should farmers be doing, Stephen, to reduce some of that pressure?
Yeah, I suppose, Siobhan, as you say, it has been a high pressure year. It's been high pressure from both yellow rust and septoria. I suppose the dry spring at the very start allowed yellow rust to come into those susceptible varieties. And then we had a really wet May here in Oak Park, and 150 mils or over 150 mils allowed septoria to come in. So there are the two sort of diseases that we're talking about in wheat. And how farmers should be tackling it, I think the principle of integrated pest management, your IPM, and the very basis of that. To start off with, you're choosing to grow wheat. That's a decision. It's a decision to make. And the next step there is to prevent and suppress those diseases. And to do that, we really have to be looking at the varieties that are going to be sown. And that is the critical thing I think farmers should be looking at. Especially look at this time of the year, monitoring crops, getting into things like the open day here, seeing varieties, and I suppose that location-specific type of information is vitally important.
That's exactly it. So they shouldn't be just looking at their relative yield on their list. They should be looking at their septoria and their yellow rust scores and coming out and actually visualising the plots and even going in to maybe see their neighbours' fields and see how that's performing.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that's a key aspect of IPM. We can do all the measures and put in monitoring and I suppose matching the disease to the fungicide or the pesticide. But one of the critical things then is to actually evaluate how has that worked. And that's as important for the treated plots as it is the untreated. As you say, the relative yield is very important, but you have to be able to achieve that yield. And that comes down to, I suppose, all the different components of IPM. Choosing the variety that is able to suppress the disease, then the agronomic practices that will come through with that. And one of the critical things I would say is actually then going to be sowing date.
Yeah.
And that's a very, very important aspect.
So delaying sowing, Stephen.
Yeah, delaying sowing. And when I sort of talk about delaying sowing, I'm talking about delaying it as late as possible. But that is going to be relative to the location. That's going to be relative to the farmer knowing their own fields, exactly where they can delay and where's the scope to delay. Like a farmer that basically can delay into November will know that. There may be certain scenarios that actually October is as late as possible that can be done there. We have to be able to grow crops, and I think that's an important thing to remember.
Yeah, so it's easier said than done. So basically those things then are leading up, Stephen, to the disease pressure that comes at the time when fungicide is going to be applied. And easier said than done as well is spray at the correct time. And we saw this year there's disease pressure there because timings were delayed due to rain. So can you give farmers any advice, or what has that resulted in, that delay in timing this year?
Yeah, I suppose that delay in timing, and that's where I sort of talk about that risk and the variety and the sowing date. Allow a certain management of risk.
Yeah.
But the reality is, look, as you say, if it turns wet at the end of April and into May, the ability to get into the fields to, I suppose, match the control regime to the risk that's already been built into that crop becomes very difficult. In the scenario this year where I suppose that second sort of application at the flag leaf has been delayed, what we've seen is more disease probably on in the lower canopy, in that leaf 2 and that leaf 3. The flag leaf, fortunately at this point, we had a sort of a dry June, which has held it on the flag leaf, okay, which is very important for I suppose, grain filling. But the lower canopy in terms of that leaf 2, which is also important for grain filling, because we had that delay in that second application, we've seen that I suppose the curativity has dropped off from that aspect. It's inevitable that as we push that delay in longer and longer, the chemistry is only as good as it is. Even though we've got our new molecules onto the market, they're only as good as, I suppose, that timing. And that's why timing is critical. But as I say, we can build a certain amount of that risk in with the variety and with the sowing date. And that's why the decisions that come early in the season, and I'm talking about that autumn sort of decisions, have a knock-on consequence later on in that month of May when we're at that critical timings for fungicide applications.
So the main thing is, Stephen, get out, walk your crops, walk your own crops, try and get out into other plots and learn from the mistakes of this year.
IPM is a knowledge-based sort of system, and the more knowledge that you can gain, the better.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Stephen.
No problem.
Well, there was a lot of very interesting information included in those 2 interviews, and I know that they made a particular impact on a lot of the people that were here today. But I'm now joined by Stephen Kildea of Teagasc, one of the researchers we saw in the last video. And Stephen, can I start by just asking you, getting away from wheat just for 1 second, but just for barley disease control. Ramularia is a disease that, in a sense, we've been left vulnerable to, given the loss of chlorothalonil last year. How have we fared in trials this year at keeping it at bay?
So 21 has been a high Ramularia pressure year. I suppose the one good thing to come from it is that in terms of treatment, and we have been able to control Ramularia. Now, I say we have been able to control it. We've been able to control it to a point. At this stage of winter barley, there's plenty of Ramularia around. And in the spring barley trials, we can see Ramularia starting to bubble up. But in terms of winter barley, look, I'm happy that we've maximised grain filling at this stage of the year. So Ramularia coming in now, I wouldn't be as concerned about it. So I think I suppose, given the pressure that has been there, I think we've done a very good job in terms of Ramularia control.
I saw plenty of Ramularia in the untreated spring barleys, but the treated ones were much better. So again, if we can hold it out for long enough.
Exactly. I think that's where, for barley, is a point that we just want to maximise the length of that, I suppose, green leaf duration to the point where actually it's not going to make much of a difference later on if we do get some Ramularia in. And I think that's one thing we're probably going to have to accept a certain amount of Ramularia in crops.
Okay. Stephen, one of the questions that had come in from a viewer earlier was that he's been growing a very yellow rust prone variety and he's been happy with it up to now until this year.
Yep.
Should he have been unhappy before this year, or is there a place for something that's very prone to yellow rust, be it geography or something else?
It's a very difficult question, Andy, in terms of, look, he's been happy with it to this point, and the question is, what does he mean by happy? He's been able to achieve a fairly consistent yield with it, and this year, I suppose, has shown the weakness that is there. This is most definitely a weakness in some of those varieties. And it's a weakness that, look, if he's able to control it, all good and well, but that's only, I suppose, down to the weather conditions, but allowing that, I suppose, timing of applications. And this year has, I suppose, exposed that aspect, that these varieties do come under serious pressure if they're not treated perfectly on time. And it is a big risk.
One question that I will then bring back to wheat again for a second is, we had 2 new actives, well, one last year, one more this year. How do they seem to be performing in trials, and can we look forward to a long life from them?
I'd hope that we can hope we can look forward to a very long life with them, and I think that's going to come back to how we utilise them and use them, and we need to use them in a manner that we can achieve that, delay the development of resistance. How are they looking? Look, they definitely are new actives when you look at them in the field. They're performing much better than the older actives. They've got a severe test this year in terms of the amount of rain that fell in May. So they're, in terms of what I'd expect from them, they're doing a very good job.
Okay, and I know one of the questions that had come into me was a very specific one from a farmer in Cork. What length really can we give their lifespan? And I think the answer to that is...
Well, I suppose one of the answers would be, look, we can help their lifespan. And I think that's probably the way I would adjust it. Look, the inevitable will be that nature always finds a way to get over these sort of things. But we want to make sure that we, I suppose, prolong them as much as possible. And we use them in a manner that allows that. And I say we use them in a manner, we use them only when they're required and at the rates that are required. And of course, then we're mixing them with different actives in a manner that is an anti-resistant strategy.
And Stephen, before we finish, one of in the route that was planned today, we were going through variety trials before we arrived at the station that you were manning, where you were talking about IPM. How big of a part do varieties have to play in the future of the control of serious diseases like septoria?
So when I was talking about IPM, Andy, I'm talking about the very first pillar of IPM is prevention and suppression. Varieties do that. They are critical in doing that. If we're planting varieties that are very susceptible, you're already knocking that first pillar of IPM. So we have to basically try to grow varieties that are able to resist and suppress these diseases.
Stephen, Thank you very much for that. We're again out of time. So I'm moving on, and one of the topics that, maybe not topics, one of the questions that we asked ourselves in trying to plan events for today is, what would people find interesting? It's been their first day out. We haven't been in research trials really for a couple of years. Things are changing on the outside. So my colleagues, again, Stephen and Siobhan, met with various farmers as they moved around today, and in particular as they had finished. Can I just, before we get to that video, just say that there are still a limited number of places. If anybody listening to tonight would wish to come tomorrow, but you must pre-register online if a space is there when you get it. And when we're finished running this video, you can stay with me, and I'm going to join in a panel discussion with other members from Teagasc to talk about some of the other things that were on show today, and also some bigger questions about tillage going into the future. So let's see what farmers had to say as they left the site.
Sylvester Burke here from Carlow, County Wicklow. I really found it very interesting to see the resistance to herbicides in grass weeds. It's a challenge that I'm facing on my own farm with things like sterile brome and Italian ryegrass. Haven't noticed resistance yet, but it was very interesting to see how the trials here are managing to cope with this challenge. So apart from that, I thought the new varieties and the older varieties and how they're performing is really important. I had one variety called Bennington this year, which was very bad with yellow rust, and it got mentioned a lot today, although it wasn't on trial, but it got a lot of mention in discussion. And I also thought that the rye is very interesting as a possible introduction into my cropping system. I might consider putting in some rye instead of a second wheat, to spread the workload and get that window where BYDV is a problem. So,
well, Sean Foley's my name, from near Bunclody in Wexford. My highlight today, I suppose, was maybe it's not a very nice thing to be realising, but the plot with, or the stand with Jimmy Staples with the black grass and the brome, and just how quickly it can multiply, I suppose. And it start with one plant, and before you know it's an epidemic, and it's just, I suppose we see what's going on in the UK, but it's a little bit unknown over here about how quickly it can become an issue.
My name is Patrick Yo. I'm from close to Bunclody in North Wexford. A very enjoyable day, and I suppose the highlight of the day would have been just a grassweed stand at the end there. Found it very informative, and I suppose I'm heading home now just to check to see how many I have. So that was definitely the highlight of the day here, I think.
Gerard Rochford, South County Wexford. It was very interesting. All the trial work was very informative for cereal growers. The winter wheat varieties and how they performed disease-wise, I think, was very informative. And the new varieties coming on stream from the department, which was very informative, was the treated and untreated plots, and just to make the comparison how they reacted without fungicides. And there were some very interesting aspects there.
Yeah, Liam O'Byrne, living in County Wexford South East there, near Rossler Harbour. And the highlight of mine today was the protein crops, the beans, and they were sowing these beans with the peas. And I was very impressed with that.
Okay. Welcome back. I'm joined here in studio, or maybe in the yard at the engineering building is more precise, by Kieran Collins from Teagasc, Dermot Forrestal and Ewan Mullins. And we're here to deal with, well, some of the other things that happened today, but also the various things that we weren't able to bring you, and maybe some bigger questions if we have time. But in particular, we're here to deal with your questions if you send them to us. And that's, for me, the priority. So if I can just start, guys, Ewan, I'm going to throw this one to you. How big of a job was it to try and get an event like this organised against the background and the uncertainties of all the COVID restrictions and the changing landscape?
Well, it was a huge event, but we do it every 2 years. This obviously was different. It had the added dimension of COVID, but it's a credit to all the staff here in Oak Park, the admin, the farm staff, the research staff, Andy. It's a complete team effort, and the feedback today was excellent, and that's a credit to everybody here.
Okay, and look, I think from a person that was one of the members of one of those groups, we were very impressed, or I was very impressed with the way we moved around. I don't think I was ever within 2 meters of anybody else. People respected it.
Yeah.
They took the opportunity. We're I think probably one of the first major events to go live, if I can use that phraseology.
Yeah, we were conscious that we planned this obviously last autumn. The stuff was put in the ground. We were very conscious that there was good information that needed to be shown, and we also wanted to engage with stakeholders. That's really important for the research programme. So we were all ready to go. Obviously, up to probably 3 weeks ago, we were still uncertain whether it would go ahead. So obviously we tailored it obviously fully to the COVID regulations. And in fairness to the attendees today, everybody's very mindful. We've lived with COVID for over a year and a half, so there was no issues. Everybody was on board and engagement was excellent.
You had close to 120 today and expecting...
about 200 tomorrow, hopefully.
200 tomorrow, yeah. And hopefully everybody who's registered will be able to get the time to come, because it is a really excellent set of trials that are on show, and there's just a lot to be learned here. Dermot, can I come to you next? You were manning a stand today on oilseed rape, which we didn't get to on video, but that whole concept of oilseed rape management has become so important because of the need for the accountability on nitrogen use and marrying that with crop yields.
Yeah, we did. We looked at that. I suppose what we looked at is a system that's been adopted in the UK for some time and in some other European countries of canopy management. Because oilseed rape is a little bit unique in that it gives us a good measure after the winter. This is the winter crop, of course, winter oilseed rape. It gives us a good measure by its own growth as to how much nitrogen is actually in the crop at that time. So we're now using a system, if you like, that targets, a certain green area or development at the time of flowering, that measures how much green area we have coming out of the winter, that assesses how much nitrogen is in that crop, and then calculates the nitrogen that's required to build that canopy that we need for yield. So it's a different approach rather than a more fixed approach that we're used to in the past. So what we were showing today was 3 years work on a PhD project, which is looking, I suppose, at verifying or seeing, are we getting a different response in using that sort of system here in Ireland with our weather conditions than in the UK. And I suppose we did find that there is a little bit of a difference there, that our soils are a bit different. We probably have more organic matter in the soils. Our climate is a little bit different. It's a bit milder. So we're probably getting a little bit more mineralization, a little bit more nitrogen coming from the soil through the growing season than you would be, say, in other countries or in England in particular, where the system was originally based.
And can I say that the knowledge that you're confirming from the results of those trials add to the benefit of trying to make canopy in the back end with oilseed rape, maybe not any other crop, but certainly with oilseed rape. So it's a crop that lends itself very comfortably to the organic manures going in ahead of it.
Yeah, it's by far, it's really the only crop to consider if you're thinking of trying to use organic manures that have any element of nitrogen in them. Because oilseed rape not alone will take it up and protect the environment from that perspective, but it will make good use of it in the following year. In other words, it'll hold on to it and you use it in that equation then in the following year. So that canopy management system allows us to do exactly that. It allows us, if we like, I suppose, to build, to chance building a fairly big crop, but then to avoid it getting over big by restricting and delaying the nitrogen in the following year. So it gives us a way of doing that in a very controlled way.
It's a system that I've used myself for a lot of years, the UK-based version, and I was delighted to see that you're verifying the fact that I can get away with even a bit less nitrogen.
Yeah, like it does show, like in the couple of years here, we were getting away with quite a bit less. But of course, that raises the question, we probably can't go out and say everybody should cut back completely from that UK system because, it was one site and one season. But the challenge is on, and Richie Hackett has spoken about this many times, to try and predict more accurately what nitrogen is coming from the soil and when it's coming available. And a challenge also is there to predict exactly what the crop is going to require. So we're all the time trying to pick away at those 2 big challenges.
Kieran, Dermot was also talking about break crops today and the need to be able to assess break crops, not based on the single crop, but based on their contribution to the overall rotation, either to reduce nitrogen, altered fungicide, or, altered herbicide requirement, whatever ways they are. But the challenge I think that we have to some degree is we don't have that many break crops. And we also saw Sheila talking earlier about the peas, trying to find a way to make them. From an advisor's point of view, a practical farmer's point of view, do you see that as having potential?
Yeah, I think the first thing to say, the most important thing is you just have to look at it over the duration of the rotation. I think, we can't look at break crops and their profitability on their own. And Dermot has shown in his trials, big yield increases up to 19% in the wheats that follow the oilseed rape. So I think that's very important that we consider profitability over the duration of the rotation. But I think from an IPM perspective, and we are in an era where, as policy is driving lower nitrogen, lower fungicides, and, break crops really open that door, especially in the likes of beans, fixing their own nitrogen. And then obviously the lower nitrogen requirements for the succeeding crop as well. And then the use of organic manures fits in very well, as Dermot said, with the oilseed rape. But a crucial one really, I suppose, is in relation to grass weeds that we've seen earlier on. It offers an alternative mode of action to control grass weeds, and that's very, very important. And also, sometimes different cultivation methods can suit as well. So that, in terms of cost implications on farms, that can help as well, where growers are availing sometimes the opportunity of either min-tilling or direct drilling, non-plough anyway, after maybe beans and oilseed rape. So again, that helps the financials on the farm, I suppose.
And Kieran, I want to follow up with you with just something that Dermot had said, which is good news and leaving us with a question, and that is that if we can grow very good or even higher yields of oilseed rape with much less nitrogen, and we follow that rape crop then with winter wheat, we are now going into a nitrogen index 2 situation in a field situation that could have very low soil nitrogen left over, because that's why oilseed rape was a nitrogen index 2 crop. Do you see that as a potential problem or something that we need to address quite quickly if people adopt new nitrogen management?
I suppose firstly, and as Dermot said, and Richie hack it off and says, site-to-site variation is absolutely huge. But I was kind of happy to hear Dermot saying that, they were finding that you could grow oilseed rape and lower nitrogen, because I think that's something that farmers have found on the ground, especially who build big canopies, ideally getting them sown in the end of August rather than September, building those canopies in the autumn. In terms of the succeeding crops, it's difficult to know. We are seeing quite a few variations, I suppose, and farmers tend to err on the side, of caution, because it is difficult to, I suppose, with oilseed rape, you have a canopy that you can measure, and in wheat, I suppose that's a little bit more difficult to assess where you need to be with that nitrogen. I suppose yield is obviously the one that, we record at the end, which feeds information maybe for following crops and that,
Okay, thanks, Kieran. I know we have a number of questions in from you, the viewers, and I'm going to hand over very quickly to Stephen Robb, just to outline just a couple of those questions to us, Stephen, please.
Okay, thanks, Andy. Yeah, so plenty of questions coming in. Still time, get them in, keep them coming. So I suppose one of the big topics of today was grass weeds and the area of resistance, and that's reflected in some of the questions. I have a question in from Cian in Carlow. It's quite simple. How do I know if my grass weeds are resistant? Maybe the answer isn't so simple. And this is a double barrel question, because I'm going to follow it up with another one from Brendan in Kildare, and it's around blackgrass. What do I do if my neighbour has blackgrass but won't do anything about it? So I'm going to throw that out to the panel.
Okay, guys, there was 2 questions there, and I'm going to make my best possible stab at repeating them. They both related to grass weed issues and problems. And the first one was, how do I know if the grass weed I have is actually resistant to herbicide? How do I find that out?
Yeah, I might start there. I suppose really it's walking the fields, at this time of year. That's the first step. And I think the month of July is absolutely a brilliant month to get through your crops. You're finished going through the sprayer and that, and you can find out an awful lot. And if you're finding, we'll say whether it's wild oats or brome that you've treated, and if you're finding that where some were controlled but some aren't controlled, that's always a good indicator for a start. And I suppose then you have to look at, you have to consider, what rate of herbicide did I use? What were the spraying conditions at the time? All of those things are crucially important. But if you can tick all of those boxes and you're satisfied that a good job has been done, there's a possibility that maybe a resistance may occur or be occurring. And I suppose we're fortunate here. We've a grassweed project here through the Enable Conservation Tillage, and we have a facility here where people can send in weed samples, contact us first, and we can get them tested if people are concerned.
So it's a matter of getting the seeds. Is what's needed.
Yeah, and it's not a simple process. So I think the best advice I could give is for a farmer maybe to contact maybe Jimmy Staples or any of the lads here, and we can organise testing to be done.
It was the one particular comment that resonated with me all day today, just walking around, and that was the comment kept being made: walk your crops, walk your crops, walk your crops. Because as I and many people know, it's something that's being done less and less by the people who own them. So it's terrifically good advice. It's the only way you'll know. Denver, did you have anything to add to that, or will I move on?
No, that's perfect. The work that has to be done, if you actually go to actually test it here, it is pretty tedious work, So it's exactly as Kieran says, use everything in advance first to see whether you think this particular specimen is resistant or not, or is possibly resistant. But the only sure way of checking it is to get it tested then after that.
Because the second question is a good deal more awkward to answer. And that's why I was wanting to know if you wanted the second one rather than the first one. What do you do about a neighbour who has an infestation? How do you defend yourself against that? Or how do you try to move the situation to be addressed?
It's difficult. Look, it's really difficult. We all, I suppose, sterile brome now is quite widespread, like wild oats at this stage, and you have to handle your own situation. Blackgrass is the obvious one. 5 years ago, you could probably pick the few fields around the country that are blackgrass. It's not so easy now. It's well, I won't say it's widespread, but it certainly has increased hugely. I think it is a really dangerous weed. It is the potential to create a huge cost for the industry. And I think we should do everything in our power that's going to limit the spread of that control, whether that's cleaning down machinery, that's walking our crops, or maybe if you spot it in a neighbour's field or something, that can often be an issue as well. Because remember, you might recognise blackgrass, but your neighbour may not recognise it. And I think, it's sharing that information, or if you see something that's, that you're not sure of in the field, as I say, contact anyone in Teagasc or somebody that walks your crops and that, just to get it verified to know what it is.
There was a time when it was shameful to acknowledge that you had blackgrass, but it has moved an awful lot further. There's a lot more of it about, and now it's much more a matter of addressing it than hiding it. I think that's a reasonable comment, isn't it?
I think certainly, yeah.
Okay, we're going to move on. Siobhan, you have a couple of more questions for us, I think.
Yeah, Andy, there's a few coming in on BYDV. So John in South Tip, is there any way I can identify the aphids in the field? So what should I look out for? And how long will it be before the tower collecting the aphids will help us to make spraying decisions? So the 6-metre tower that Louise showed us in the video.
Okay, 2 questions there, both relating to barley yellow dwarf virus. The first one was identifying the aphids. Are there any simple, I know we don't have any of the aphid experts here, but are there simple keys for a farmer to use with a magnifying glass to help him identify if he's dealing with the carriers as distinct from the tourists?
Okay, go ahead. Yeah, I think, look, it's the grain aphid. Is that where we're mainly concerned in terms of a vector for BYDV? In-field diagnostics is difficult, as an advisor going around, and when you walk crops, it can be difficult to find them, I suppose. But it is well worth doing at the same time, getting into your own crops. In terms of identifying the grain aphid, I suppose the key identifying feature are the black stefunculi at the abdomen of the aphid. That's probably the clearest way. But again, if you can carry a lens and get a look at them, or also use your phone to magnify it, that can be a help as well. So yeah, that's in terms of identification. I suppose the second part, I think, was in relation to the suction towers and how can we use that as a diagnostic tool, I suppose. It's a case of combining the information from the suction towers with other diagnostics like the digital PCR testing, you know, where we can, I suppose, not alone can we now look at whether they're carrying virus or not, but also the extent of that, both in the aphid and in the crop. And I suppose we also know that, you know, it's 170-degree days it takes for them to go through their cycle. So it's combining all of those pieces of information to hopefully give us, I suppose, a decision support system down the road. We're not there yet, obviously. It's the beginning of a lot of that work. So I suppose in terms of managing BYDV at the moment, I think it's a case of first principles. You know, it's sowing date, you know, and watching your location, and all of those IPM measures are still very, very valid.
Okay. The second part of that question is very related, and it's asking the work that Louise presented in the video with the suction towers. How long do we expect it will be before we would have enough information to have confidence in advising on related activities, as in spray or don't spray?
Yeah, I think it's a layered approach, Andy. So at the moment, last year we captured a lot of environmental data, the climatic factors that obviously affect aphid spread and flight. Now that we have, as Kieran mentioned, the digital PCR system has been established, that allows us to determine and quantify the viral load in an aphid, because obviously we don't know if every aphid carries the same amount of virus, and obviously if we have asymptomatic plants, they can still be, they may still be infected with BYDV, but how much BYDV is there? So all these fundamental questions need to be answered. I suppose it's BYDV, but it's a virus. So it's like any other virus that's out there. And some of the discussions around COVID and the epidemiology of COVID, those questions that people are asking, it's the same for BYDV. So there's several layers there. So to answer your question, how long will it take? At the end of this year, we'll know more obviously from this season. We'll be in a position, we've already established the droplet or the digital PCR assay for single aphids, and that's a really important step, because that allows us to get down to obviously the single aphid flight, and then into next year, hopefully at the tillage conference in January, we can be providing more information. But I mean, as Stephen alluded to earlier on, from an IPM approach, it's layer after layer after layer, and every bit of information will be beneficial to the users at the end of the day. Obviously, our goal is to try and ensure that the information that's given to farmers supports that action if it's going to be a decision to spray. But that really needs to be the last resort, and that's the goal we want to get to.
And it may be the most difficult one to prove, but just in answer to the question, is it more likely to be 5 years away before we might hit that point, or would it be in the next 2 years?
I would imagine that in 2 to 5 years we'd be in a very strong position to be where we need to be in terms of giving very robust advice, using the systems we have here, but also collaborations with other partners, hopefully using AI, artificial intelligence, capturing huge data sets to try and give prediction tools.
And taking that information again and putting it back to the question that was asked of Kieran, that Kieran answered about recognising the aphids. When that's up and running, it'll be an awful lot less important for people to identify individual aphids, because it's not an aphid issue, it's a virus issue, really.
That's exactly it. And I mean, we have a project starting in October, even within the suction towers. I mean, as Max showed, when you get that sample coming through the suction tower, it's not only aphids that's in there, it's a collection of everything that's flying around. So it's a bit of a soup of insects in there. And it's not a very easy process to tease out the aphids, and the students here are doing that. So one of the goals of a new project called Rapid Pest starting in October is to use molecular techniques so that we can take that whole soup, basically, and get a very quick characterization of what's there in terms of a species identification, but then also get an idea of what's the viral load in that sample. And that's going to be very informative, because it then allows us to map that climate data with obviously aphid flight, but with viral presence in the environment. And that's really what we don't have at the moment.
And those towers can be used then to look at a lot of the other insects that are there that might be carrying viruses onto potatoes, onto beet, onto brassicas, etc.
Yeah, PVY obviously for potatoes, and also any horticultural crops. One of the towers is in West Dublin, and Michael Gaffney is going to be working with horticultural growers to give advice to them using the towers, because they really are just a resource, obviously. That's what they are, and they're going to be available to both tillage and horticultural sector.
Okay, I'm handing back to Stephen for a minute. Stephen, you have a few more questions that have come in from viewers.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. So we have one very good question in here from Brian in County Donegal. Brian says, will gene editing be allowed in Europe? The wheat varieties in the video seem to be showing high levels of disease, and he's asking, are we running out of other tools?
Stephen, can I ask you to repeat the last one again for me, please?
So he's asking, Brian in Donegal is asking, will gene editing be allowed in Europe? We're basically running out of tools.
Okay. So it's all related. I'm thinking that one is going to fall back to you, Ewan.
Okay.
And you know, during the walk around today, it did come up. The whole subject matter did come up in relation to the difficulties that we're encountering with new varieties and certain specific resistance genes breaking down now in some variety lines. They could be bolstered by gene editing, we think. The first question is, could they? And then the question is really asking, is Europe ever likely to allow us to do it?
Okay, so to answer the first question, does gene editing have the potential to deliver? It does, and we know that from what's being published at the moment. So for viewers, gene editing is basically a form of precision breeding. It allows you to accurately alter DNA sequences within a plant, be it a barley, potato, wheat, whatever plant. And those gene sequences control the traits, so be it yield, quality, etc. Precision breeding is basically a molecular scissors, so it allows you to go in and you can alter one individual sequence, change that trait, and that obviously has an added effect on the ability of the plant to perform. The real, I suppose, arena where it's going to have potential in Ireland is around, as you say, disease resistance. And as we saw today, the varieties have to be robust. We've seen in winter wheat where we think we have pretty good resistance that can break down quickly because the diseases are evolving. So we need these tools. They're really important because without them, we're effectively trying to attain the goals of farm to fork with our hands tied behind our back. And that's obviously going to be challenging enough, even with gene editing. So the second part of the question, when do we think Europe will look on it differently? Well, there was a study published in April by the European Commission, a 2-year study, and it was very clear, and the language in it was very succinct, because what it said was that the current GM legislation is not fit for purpose when it comes to novel breeding techniques such as gene editing and cisgenics. So gene editing itself is, in fact, a form of mutagenesis, and that's been around. Mutagenesis has been in existence for 40, 50 years. Over 60% of varieties around the world are derived from mutagenesis. Editing or precision breeding allows us to do it in a much more accurate way. So from that study published by the Commission in April, they've actually outlined an 18-month to 24-month process whereby the goal is to start to I suppose make the regulatory process more fit for purpose, more applicable, so that products such as editing and cisgenics can be looked at in a way where not only just the risk, potential risk, is evaluated, but actually also the potential impact and the potential benefit. And that is a significant change, because the legislation that exists at the moment goes back to 2001. So obviously science doesn't stop. Science does what science does. It continuously evolves and improves. The legislation has been quite static, and we've seen that in the last few years, where we've seen editing come to the fore, but the legislation, as to use the Commission's word, is not fit for purpose. So to give an idea of a time frame, I would imagine in the next possibly 3 to 5 years, Europe will be looking at gene-edited products in a different regulatory environment. It'll still go through the risk assessment process, but it'll be more an impact assessment process. And agencies such as EFSA, the European Food Safety Authority, have published several studies and work on gene editing already in regard to that.
From where I sit, I just don't know how we can achieve the objectives of farm to fork if we don't have this as a primary tool to help alleviate the need for, not to remove, but to alleviate the need for so much pesticide in the equation. Anybody else have anything?
Just as an example, I suppose, if growers think of spring barley varieties at the moment, you know, we generally don't use mildewcides anymore because we have that genetic resistance is there. You know, and we just spoke about BYDV, and you know, we've got a winter barley tolerant variety, Joyo, available at the moment, you know, and I suppose if gene editing is available, it does speed up that process, and as you said, rightly say, it does reduce the pesticide load, and that's where we want to be, you know.
Okay, thanks for that, guys. Siobhan, have you got another question in there from somebody?
Yeah, there's a few more here, Andy. So Shane in Kildare He wants to know, is it practical to grow peas in Ireland anymore? Harvest can be difficult, and he says there must be a reason that we went away from growing them in the first place. David in Laois wants to know, are there any winter barley varieties with good resistance to ram malaria? He says it's really taking off this year.
Okay, 2 questions there. The first one was regarding peas. You know, are peas a potential runner? People have run away from them, tried them and run away from them so many times in the past. Are we beating our head against the stone wall trying to resurrect them, was the question.
Yeah, well, I suppose, I wouldn't declare myself an expert on peas, Andy, but I think there's a challenge there, but there's benefits there as well in terms of the type of protein and the quality protein that peas produce. They are different than beans from that perspective, and they do have some certain advantages as well as for human consumption, of course, but even in as animal feed. But the challenge there is, I think many people in the pea growing area used to say you only grow as much peas as you can harvest in one day's cutting. So the big problem is, the resistance to lodging just isn't there in the varieties that are there. So again, there is scope. There's always scope for varietal development. I mean, you heard today in some of the talk about, mixing peas and beans to try and get over that. But of course, there's huge challenges in terms of harvest. Even if you are prepared to accept the peas and beans being in the same mixture, there's challenges in getting harvest dates right for something like that. But at least it's looking in that direction. So look, peas are going to be a challenge. The legume, I suppose, that we put most of our building of market on at the moment is beans, and we want to get everybody having confidence, I suppose, growing that. But look, legumes have a huge role to play probably in the future. Farm to fork, again, you mentioned, Andy, in terms of trying to get to live with a certain nitrogen reduction by including one legume crop in a 5-year rotation. We straight away have that reduction in nitrogen that you're looking for in the farm to fork policy. So there is advantages in trying to expand the legumes that are there.
Yeah, I think the other thing, and just to add to that, Andy, is that we have a project called U Protein, which funded by the department, started last year, which is about unlocking the added value potential in our legume crops and our protein crops. And it's not just about growing protein crops for animal feed with a partial use for human consumption. It's actually about trying to generate novel formulation and processes so that we can get more from what we already grow and add that value to growers. That's the key part.
Anybody else got other comments to make on that before we leave it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been said, but the protein element is, I suppose, from a lot of different reasons, and none more so than at farm level. The benefits that's going to bring. Just on the ram malaria one, Andy, if I might tackle that one. It's for anybody, again, I talk about walking crops. For anybody that's gone through their winter barley in recent days, we'll see, no matter what fungicide program you use, a level of ram malaria. Our varietal resistance is poor. There are some differences, but they're subtle. You'll see the likes of Pixel and Valerie. Initially, they tend to succumb first. But even some of the better ones like Cassia, they all ended up with ram malaria this season. Obviously, it's a symptom of stresses that go on earlier in the season. But as you said earlier on, the lactochlorotalonil has been, crucial in terms of control. But, in terms of varietal, there are some differences, but I don't think they're big enough that are making that challenge, lessening that challenge, really.
Okay, I mean, so in answer to the man's question, he asked, was there a variety with reasonable resistance out there that could be used even as the basis of a breeding program? And we're saying no.
Yeah,
we don't know of it.
It's small. You'll go through the variety trials today and you'll see ram malaria in them all. But as I said, some varieties like Valerie and Pixel do pick it up earlier, all right.
Okay. If I can kind of just bring maybe the last set of questions. In your book today, there's quite an amount of ongoing research noted in the back of it, which wasn't on show. And it just is indicative of the huge volume of work that's going on here by researchers, postgraduates, postdocs, etc. in the place. And if I can just pick up on one of them that is of interest to a lot of people, and that's the one on wheat for whiskey making. Where is that? Is it likely to be? Is it only starting? Is it likely to be successful?
Yeah, we hope so. It's a department-funded project called Dabbing Cap. Richie Hackett and John Spink here are leading that work, and I suppose the question that they're asking is how suitable is Irish whiskey for distilling? The project is only just started. There are academic partners involved as well, IT Carlow, and I mean, it's I think a 4 or 5 year project. But we would be very hopeful, and obviously stakeholders are very interested in it as well. It comes back to what we talked about a few minutes ago, finding added value opportunities for the crops that we grow. You know, we need to be able to generate more value rather than just feeding them to cattle. That's obviously very important. So it doesn't matter whether it's wheat for distilling, oats, we talked about peas, anything at all. And that's really a strong focus of the work here into the future, really.
It's about keeping money in farmers' pockets, putting it in it and keeping it in it.
Yeah, well, it has to be, whatever we do has to be economically sustainable. That's essential.
Okay, gentlemen, we're out of time. We've had a lot of good questions come in. Thank you very much for taking the time out of a long day with an even longer day tomorrow to be endured. And both to you on the panel, to all the others that have joined us here this evening, and to all the staff in Oak Park that have helped to facilitate and accommodate us to be able to bring this broadcast to a bigger audience tonight. We hope that a lot of people got something from it, and we hope we told you just about enough to make you maybe even want to come tomorrow to get a fuller picture of the things that we've been doing. So in just wrapping up, I want to thank again everybody that's involved in Teagasc, John Ewan and all the staff that have given their time, both, as I say, to get the event to run at all in these COVID restrictions, but also to make it run as well as it did. For that, we thank you very much. Can I also thank all my colleagues in the Farmers Journal, Siobhan and Katrina and Stephen, for the work that they've done in all the videoing and the vox popping and all of that work, because it all adds to the feel and the flavour of what happened here today. And it has been a really, really good day. I also just want to thank, before we break up, all of the teams that are involved. Outside broadcasts are always challenging, and there's a lot of work that goes in behind the scenes to make it work, and they had me under really heavy starters orders. It's probably the first time in my life I ever finished something on time, or pretty much on time anyway, so thanks for all your help in that. And just before we break up, for those of you that have come to Oak Park for decades at this point in time to visit open days, you have always been very impressed at the standard of work, the standard of workmanship, and the general condition of the farm and how it's laid out. A lot of that hinged on the farm manager of the last 18 odd years, Johnny Hogan, and Johnny is retiring at the end of next month, and we just want to say thanks for all the work that he's done on all our behalves and on behalf of Tillage Farming, and also to wish him every health and happiness in his retirement. And with that, I'll bring the broadcast to a close. Thanks for joining us, and good luck with the harvest.